Stand pledge allegiance to the flag. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Larry?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Litherland?
Here.
Councilman Green?
Here.
Councilman Salvani?
Here.
Mayor Ashworth?
Here.
Thank you. Mayor, we can't get the video to show. Can you give us just a second?
Pardon?
We can't get the video to look at your
All right,
screen.
we'll hold up a minute. Technical difficulties.
Not on the screen, Sharon.
We got an IT guy, bro. Yep. Give her a hand if you would.
This is the most boring movie I've ever seen.
Hey, Melissa, I'm perfectly fine if nobody out there sees my face
They
tonight.
can hear you.
Well, matter of fact, we're looking for a close-up, Bessie.
I think his recording's probably wrong.
It was working a minute ago, until I hit. It's working.
Melissa, is the recording working?
Yes, they can hear you.
Okay, you want just do one. Yeah. All right, we'll move along. Approval of meetings, minutes of prior meetings.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes from the April 2022 regular meeting. And I motion that we approve the minutes from the April 26, 2022 special meeting.
Second.
Vote please.
Councilman Green?
Yes.
Councilwoman Sharon?
Yes.
Councilman Salvani?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Litherland?
Yes.
Mayor Ashworth?
Yes. Okay, public comment. Annie, you have anything to say about the school?
No updates
Okay.
since 2 weeks ago.
Thank you. Anybody else? Moving on to reports, city administrator.
Just a couple of items, Mayor. Frank Salvato, City Administrator. Today, or I guess May 8th, is Bob Chevalier's 10-year anniversary, building and grounds maintenance. He does a great job for the city. If you don't know, the county hired a new county administrator, Ross Herzog. There was a meet and greet for him on the 28th, and look forward to working with Ross. And the last thing, Jeff put together a good group. We met last week. The mayor was there and Councilmember Green. We discussed childcare and the care center, and That's about all we can say right now, but we're still trying to make things happen in the community for both childcare and the care center if possible. So I don't have anything else, Mayor. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Finance Director, Paul.
Good evening, Council. I wanted to give you an update on Senate Bill 22-216 that we mentioned at the last council meeting. We had just found out about it that day, I think. So it's been a whirlwind week and a half. As introduced, the bill would have cost Central City, Cripple Creek, Blackhawk, and Teller County $1.3 million out of our gaming tax distribution. And that is because they were moving, at least one of the items they were doing were moving funds from the limited gaming fund to the extended gaming fund. And anytime dollars are moved there, it hurts those entities because of the distribution formula. Limited gaming is based on adjusted gross proceeds, where extended gaming is based on taxes paid in. And our smaller casinos all start lower in the 6 tax tiers at the beginning of the year and then move through there, where one large casino, say in Blackhawk, starts very high in the tiers and pays more taxes in. Excuse me. So Frank and I went up last Wednesday to Denver last Tuesday to testify against the bill. All 3 Teller County commissioners made the trip up. We had representatives from Central, from Blackhawk, from Gilpin. Also, Colorado Municipal League came out and opposed the bill and did a great job speaking on our behalf, as well as CCI, Colorado Counties, Inc. So we appeared before the Senate Appropriations Committee, aired our grievance and specifically how the process was done, that none of the gaming towns or counties or anyone impacted by it was included in the discussions, and the fact that we're in no position to be losing money. $310K for us, $230K for the county was the rough numbers at that time. And it seemed like an uphill battle. But they did listen to us, and the next day we had an offer to revise the bill that would reinstate our funding, would make the bill a 1-year sunset bill, so that's good, and also set up a work group where all the different beneficiaries from the tax distribution will be represented, and we can start to negotiate some of these distribution formulas and some of the very large assumptions the state has made in terms of distributions where they think there isn't enough data around it. So we're looking forward to participating in those. And it passed the Senate 28-7. And the 7 who voted against it really did so because they were just disappointed in the bill itself and how we had been excluded from the negotiations. The only people that ever spoke in favor of this were the State Historic Fund and the community colleges, because they were the beneficiaries and they were the ones that were at the table at the state to negotiate. So we were very pleased that it passed through the Senate, and this morning it passed through the House Appropriations Committee. So later, I haven't heard from Saul yet when I last looked at my email, but later today or early tomorrow, it should go to the full House. So at this point, we really feel like it's a win for the gaming communities and the counties.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Presentations, updates, and other reports. Presentation of Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My name is Andy Gunning. I'm the Executive Director for the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments. And with me tonight is Jessica McMullen. She's our Policy and Communications Manager, and pleasure to be here with you tonight to give you just a brief update on what we're up to at the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments. Cripple Creek has been a longstanding member. And it's good to be here in person. It's been a little while, obviously. Mr. Mayor, we met a number of years ago. It was before the pandemic, but good to be here in person. Jeff has been very much involved in representing the city on the board of PPACG and also our legislative committee that meets on a weekly basis, but it's good to see Jeff in person. It's good to meet your still new city manager, Frank. We haven't had a chance to meet yet, so really looking forward to working together on a number of different initiatives. So pleasure to be here tonight, and thanks for giving me a few minutes just to remind you who we are or introduce you to who we are, what we're up to, and how we can work together. So I've got a few slides I'm going to go through, and I think you may have some other material as well, our annual report and some other things. But the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments, or PPACG, we're a regional planning agency. It covers the 3-county area, El Paso, Teller, and Park counties. We're here to deal with issues that cross jurisdictional boundaries, and in a couple of specific ways that I'll talk about tonight, but in other opportunities as well that may come up. But we're one of 14 COGs, or councils of government, across the state of Colorado. Here you can see who the members are. We represent and work with all the cities and towns, the 13 cities and towns in our 3-county region. Our governing board is made up of elected officials from all the local jurisdictions. There's 3 from the city of Colorado Springs, 3 from El Paso County, but then 1 each from all of our other local jurisdictions. Just a little bit as far as our current leadership. Our chair is Commissioner Stan Vanderwerf. He's the chair of the El Paso County Board of County Commissioners. Our vice chair is Mayor Sharon Thompson from the city of Fountain. Eric Stone, Commissioner Stone, represents Teller County on the board and does so very well. He always keeps the other communities within Teller County in mind as we have our board meetings and legislative committee meetings and so forth. From the city of Woodland Park, active participation from Council Member Robert Zulawaga. So just to let you know the sense of who the folks are around the table, and a whole host of other elected officials. We have, I was thinking about this in the drive up, we'll call it the Cripple Creek carve out. We allowed an exception as far as board representation to have staff members, sort of senior staff members, serve on the board as well, but in a non-voting capacity. We took this to our board a couple of years ago at the city of Cripple Creek's request, and I think you had your planning director represent the city in the past, and more recently it's been Jeff Mosier. We're really glad to have him as part of our board engagement, but we allow staff members to sit on the board as well, but just as non-voting members outside of the urbanized area. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a few minutes when I talk about some of our transportation work that we're involved with. So that's a little bit about our overall kind of governing structure. Not going to dig into this, but we've got a strategic plan that we adopted in 2018 that really kind of drives everything that we work on in our organization. Some of the big themes that came out of our strategic plan adopted in 2018 are convening and advocacy and information sharing, but we serve as a collaboration hub for a lot of different things across the region. So I'm going to just kind of touch briefly on some key issues, and each one of our 4 main program areas, and they're aging, environmental planning, military planning, I think is one that follows that, and then transportation planning. Then I'll say a few words about legislative issues that we're involved with as well. And you're already deeply engaged in legislative issues that affect the city, and that's really great to hear. But our first program is we operate what's called the Area Agency on Aging, or the AAA, as you may have heard it referenced in the past. We coordinate senior services that go out to the community to help our 60 and over population, and really with the main goal to help our seniors remain as independently as possible in their homes and in their communities. That's kind of our main goal within the AAA services we provide. We provide services directly from our organization, and those are primarily the ones on the right-hand side of the slide, but also information and assistance. But we provide a lot of support through resources like our Yellow Book, and we may have brought some examples of that up as well, that identifies a whole bunch of services that are available in Teller County and the other counties in our region. We provide, as far as senior insurance information and assistance, advice and consultation for seniors navigating the Medicare process, especially during open enrollment in the fall. We operate a family caregiver support center where we help members of our community that are caring for older adults, and a lot of us are having to do that, and we're not trained to do that. We don't have that kind of background, so we help provide those support and services to help folks navigate that. We provide an ombudsman service where we work with seniors in long-term care facilities, and I know our ombudsman team has been working closely with folks up here with the unfortunate pending closure with the care center here. I know they were up here for the meeting last night. There's not, unfortunately, a whole lot that we can do, but they have been strong supporters of just a really excellent care center that has been operated up here for many, many years and has always received exceptionally high marks. So those are kind of the main services that we provide in-house. On the upper left-hand corner of the slide, we also contract out services to other nonprofits and other community members across the region. And in Teller County, that's the Community of Caring and the Teller Senior Coalition. We go through a process each year where we allocate funding that we get from the feds and the states out to our nonprofit community to provide direct services for seniors as well. And we're about to approve the next tranche of funding next week at our board meeting, as a matter of fact. But I've worked for a long time very closely with the Senior Coalition and Community of Caring. One more slide on aging-related issues. Just a couple of key priorities that we've been working on for this year. We received some Arpa funding that we're looking at where to put that to really good use to help our senior community in a long-term way. Obviously, getting through the pandemic has been extraordinarily difficult for the senior community especially, and it's really highlighted some really difficult issues around social isolation and access to really basic needs like food and medical care and transportation and things like that. So we're going through a planning process right now to figure out how to get the ARPA dollars that we have out into the community to really build some much needed capacity out there in the region. We've been very focused on senior affordable housing as well, including within legislation that unfortunately isn't going to move this year, but we're going to take another try at it next year to do some things to help our seniors age in place affordably. We're very involved in senior transportation, mobility coordination needs across the entire region. That's a very acute need, and long-term care needs as well for seniors in our long-term centers. And we're facing the same issue that you're facing up here with the care center everywhere throughout the region in the Springs and elsewhere, with trying to get staff and nurses and others to be able to staff up our long-term centers. We had a really good roundtable discussion around that about a month or so ago, and we're digging into some possible solutions. Unfortunately, a lot of these things take a while to really show some movement, but we're trying to lean into that as best we can so we can kind of fix this going forward. So any questions on senior-related stuff before I kind of shift gears? Feel free to interrupt me as I go along. Next program, and I'll be fairly brief here, is environmental quality and planning, and really is focused on just two main areas. We coordinate air quality planning across our region, especially within the urbanized area around the Colorado Springs area, to be honest with you, within El Paso County. And that's by definition by what the feds and the state want us to look at as far as air quality needs within the urbanized area. But we also coordinate water quality needs, and that's across the entire region. And that really involves working with our wastewater providers and our local jurisdictions that provide wastewater service and water service. But we develop a long-range plan that deals with our wastewater needs across the entire region to make sure it's meeting our population growth needs. And I had a good chat with Frank about this before we got started tonight. We're going to make sure we rope in you guys on our next Water Quality Management Committee meeting, because there's money out there, grant funds and loans and others for capacity expansion of wastewater treatment plants and other operations. One thing I'll mention before I leave this is on air quality. One of the big things we're focused on, and granted it's more down in the El Paso County area, but we're really struggling to meet air quality standards, federal standards for ground level ozone. And it's become a big issue, it's a health issue, but it's got a real potential to where we're seeing really bad numbers the past couple of summers with just increased emissions at the ground level. And those get exacerbated when we have really bad wildfire seasons. So this all gets sort of interconnected throughout our entire region and throughout our entire state, obviously. And we have concerns if we end up in what's called non-attainment for air quality standards at the federal that the Fed set, especially with ozone, that has implications on us as far as our economic growth, has an impact on us as far as visitors coming to the region. If our air is not clean, outdoor recreation is a huge part of our industry, obviously, and that does connect us all together. So that's one thing that's really been front and center with a lot of the stuff that we're working on at PPACG. Shifting gears again, just briefly on military planning, we coordinate planning activities around our 5 major military installations in the region. They comprise about 40% of our regional economy, the installations and spin-off industries do, so we want to make sure we're not making bad decisions that impact our different installations. The one thing I'll mention here that's become a real focus of ours in this current cycle that we're in is we're standing up a wildfire coordination group, and admittedly, the focus has been around our military installations, but we're looking at possibly expanding that beyond just a couple of miles around each one of the military bases, and finding that there's a real need for us to get the folks that deal with wildfire planning together in the same room. There's a lot of money available at the state level and at the federal level if we start working together on a coordinated basis to go after grants and such for doing some proactive mitigation. So much more to come on that, and I'd like to reach out to the county and the city and see how we can bring you guys into the fold with that. So we're trying to figure out how we can sort of stand up that process and go after some of the funds that are out there for wildfire mitigation. And then finally, a few words about transportation planning. That's a big part of what we do as well. Transportation planning and the AAA are really the 2 biggest departments we have at PPACG. Not going to dig into this in great detail, but you guys are actually, and you may know this already, that you're part of the transportation planning region of the Central Front Range, and you work closely with CDOT on various projects that you want to get funded in and around Cripple Creek that are on the state system. And we recognize that a lot of our transportation planning work does get focused around what's called the MPO, or the Metropolitan Planning Organization area, the urbanized area, and that's by definition CDOT and the feds make us do that. But we're also trying to provide service outside of that area throughout the entire region in a couple of tangible ways that I can give you some examples on. But one thing we're working on is a tri-county transportation study, and I brought a copy of that with me. That's really an effort to identify what our jurisdictions outside of that urbanized area need as far as transportation services. You get great support from CDOT, I know, on the state system, but outside of that, when you're dealing with county roads and local roads and other transportation needs, whether it's transit or other improvements that need to be made, you maybe don't always have a place to voice those concerns and those needs. So we've been going through this planning process with this tri-county study to help identify what those needs are. And we just finished up our first first phase of that process with a stakeholder engagement effort, and got a whole list of really good projects and needs that have been identified. I know we've met a number of times with folks in Cripple Creek and Teller County and elsewhere. We're about to go into the next phase of that study where we actually take some of those projects and start doing some kind of high-level, planning-level cost estimates of what it's going to take for some of those improvements and transit needs and things like that. I know I was briefed before I came up here on what some of the needs were that came up in Cripple Creek, and talked about improvements, obviously, along Highway 67 and passing lanes and things like that. A need for more transit service that connects Cripple Creek to Woodland Park and then down to the Springs, and things like that. So we're really digging into that more in the next phase to see what some of the costs would be for some of those services. And then also looking at, with the consultant that we've hired, what are some funding opportunities to try to get after some of those projects if we want to keep moving these forward and actually get these implemented. So I'm glad we've been able to kind of expand that and provide that service to the rest of our region. So I think that's been a pretty good effort so far. I'm going to skip over a couple of these things because a lot of them do pertain more to that urbanized area that I talked about. But do want to say a few words about Drive Smart Colorado. If you've got an interest in getting involved in traffic safety needs, we're seeing a really, really high unacceptable rate of serious and fatal crashes across our entire region, not just in the city and in the urbanized area, but everywhere, on US 24 and 67 and just all over. And it's really gotten to a level where it's unacceptable. So we're trying to lean into this and see what we can do as far as driver education and awareness, and remind people to put their phones down when they're driving in unsafe conditions or going through intersections or trying to pass somebody, you name it. So we're really leaning into this education program. So if you have an interest, anybody on city staff has an interest in engaging on that, we'd love to rope you in. We're working closely with the law enforcement community, especially because they can help us really identify what some of the needs are and what some of the messages could be there. And the final thing I'll mention here is we're setting up a couple of groups around the federal infrastructure bill that was passed back in November by Congress. It's got a whole bunch of different pots of money for a bunch of different programs: transportation, broadband improvements, electric vehicle charging opportunities, wildfire mitigation, and a whole series of others. So we've been digging into it, and we're setting up different work groups that deal with some of the specific areas, especially broadband, electric vehicle support, and wildfire mitigation, and pulling together subject matter experts and other jurisdictional representatives that want to sit at those committees and really identify what the needs are from their perspective, so we can get smart about going after some of the grants that are out there on a competitive basis. That some of those have been passed down to the states. We'll have to apply to the state of Colorado. Others are direct applications to the federal government. Guidance is still coming out on a lot of these things, but we really want to get smart and coordinated on what we can go after as a region and really try to bring some of that funding back here. There's some extraordinary opportunities out there, so if we can come up with some coordinated approaches, that would serve us really well. I think that was it as far as transportation. Going to wrap up with legislative advocacy. We've got a really active legislative committee, which is basically a subcommittee of our governing board. And like I said, Jeff has been engaged in that effort, and that's super that we've got your representation there. Just real briefly, the main legislative items that we've been tracking this year, thankfully the session is over in a week, next Wednesday, I think it's over. It's been a tough one, but for 2022, we've been tracking initiatives around affordable senior housing. Weren't quite able to move the ball forward on that, but we're going to take another shot at that next year, I'm sure. Wildfire mitigation, I've seen some areas of success come to fruition there. And then funding for greenhouse gas emissions requirements that the states put on regions like ours and other communities that are building transportation projects. We've been trying to work through that as well. But we've got a super active legislative group, and we hire a lobbyist that we hold his feet to the fire to really track what's going on up in Denver, and things have been coming fast and furious, as I'm sure you guys have been hearing as well. So really trying to bolster our voice within our legislative delegation. We hold a couple of roundtable events each year with our member jurisdictions, elected officials, our stakeholders, and with our delegation, and we usually get an excellent response from our delegation across the region there. So we've been able to build some really good relationships with our local legislators there. So covered a lot of ground. I tend to talk kind of fast, but happy to answer any and all questions you may have, but also happy to hear what might be of interest for the city that we ought to consider.
Any question? Well, thank you very much for coming.
Okay, super.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Yeah, we will be working together. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. New business. Second reading to consider adoption of ordinance 2022-03, an ordinance of the city of Cripple Creek, Colorado, amending chapter 1, article 4 of the Cripple Creek Municipal Code relating to community or useful public services and approval of related community service supervision agreement between the city of Cripple Creek and the Aspen Mine Center. Laura Lowenheim, please.
Yeah, good evening, Mayor and Council. Laura Lowenheim, Deputy City Clerk. This is a housekeeping item, just second reading of this ordinance 2022-3, allowing for a provision for community service option for the judge to do.
I have a question. Under general penalty for violations, section 1-4-20, what is the definition? It says here, community service shall be performed under the supervision of a community service provider. What's the definition, and who is our community service provider?
We, on the first reading, we had the agreement with the Aspen Mine Center.
Okay, that
including that they will be our only provider.
Only,
yes,
okay.
because they were willing to provide the services and carry the insurance as well.
Thank you, Laura.
Anything else? Good. Is there a motion?
I motion we adopt ordinance number 2022-03 as written.
Second,
Vote please.
Mayor Pro Tem Wonderland,
Yes.
Councilman Solomani,
Yes.
Councilman Reed,
Yes.
Councilwoman Shenary,
yes.
Mayor Ashworth.
Yes. Then item B, consider approval of resolution 2022-10, approving an update to the city of Cripple Creek personal handbook. Carol?
It's Heather tonight. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Heather Hildebrand, HR Risk Management Technician. Carol has been working with Chief Bright, City Administrator Salvato, and City Attorney Aaron Smith on getting a volunteer program set up within the police department. So one of the things we wanted to do, they would like some of these volunteers to be able to drive city vehicles. It is currently in our handbook that volunteers cannot do that. So under certain circumstances where it is approved through the Human Resources Department and the proper vetting has taken place, we want them to be able to. So we are updating the manual to state that. Aaron did help us make it where it doesn't mean all volunteers can drive, just once they've been approved.
Heather, I have a question.
Yes.
At the last paragraph, City of Cripple Creek will determine proper disciplinary action. How do you discipline a volunteer?
I believe there is something, I apologize, I don't have it in front of me, on our volunteer waivers and releases and such. It's basically, of course, you would start with a conversation, this action is not acceptable, and then we could move forward to saying we no longer wish to have your services if needed, as a volunteer.
Okay, I appreciate you putting this together, the HR putting this together.
Anybody have any other questions? Is there a motion?
I'll motion that we approve resolution amending the personnel handbook for the City of Cripple Creek to amend driving guidelines for volunteers. Approving an update to the City Cripple Creek personnel handbook.
Yes.
There we go.
Second. Vote please.
Councilman Reed,
Yes.
Councilwoman Shenary,
Yes,
Councilman Solomani,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Wonderland,
Yes.
Mayor Ashworth.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item C, consider approval of resolution 2022-11. A resolution authorizing the submittal of a grant request to Elkamar for wildlife equipment. Chief Joe.
Chief, don't be afraid. Come on.
I am. Mayor Council, Joe O'Connor, the Fire Chief. I have a couple items for you this afternoon. This first involves wildland firefighting. We have found a grant opportunity with the El Pomar Foundation to resupply our personal protective equipment for our firefighters engaged in wildland fire. The grant amount is in the amount of $14,381.05. Part of the application process requires review by this board, so I seek your approval to submit the grant. There are no guarantees, but I believe we have a strong case to warrant the funding.
As I said to you, Chief, I think this is perfect timing, since a lot of the TV stations, local TV stations, are running segments on wildland fires and so on and so forth. I think it's great timing that we're submitting this.
If I might keep, and maybe you can, because I understand the shelf life of the equipment you guys use, but maybe the rest of the board doesn't. I think maybe it's a good time to explain that.
So most of the equipment has a serviceable life of 10 years. The National Fire Protection Association has got a lot of rules. We don't necessarily are unable to follow all of them, but we certainly want to follow their guidance when it comes to personal protective equipment. Many of our fire shelters, which is a rather expensive item, but it's a life-saving one, are beginning to show signs of wear, just simply being carried around in backpacks up and down hills and whatnot. So this grant would provide to replace those, as well as the yellow and green personal Nomex personal protective gear and some other items. So I think it is warranted to replace. They're starting to show their age.
Okay, do I hear a motion to approve the resolution?
I'll make the motion to approve resolution number 2022-11.
I'll second.
Vote please.
Councilman Reed,
Yes.
Councilwoman Shmoneri,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Litherland,
Yes.
Councilman Sodamani.
Yes.
Mayor Ashworth.
Yes. Thank you, Chief. Consider approval of intergovernmental agreement with the Northwest Teller County Fire Protection District for emergency vehicle maintenance. Chief?
Once again, thank you. Fire trucks are complicated items. They have hydraulic systems and pumping systems and wiring that goes well beyond the knowledge base of most mechanics. Northeast Teller County Fire Protection District has hired an emergency vehicle technician qualified to work on fire apparatus. In the past, the fire department has utilized their service to help troubleshoot issues with our ladder truck, with a few other pieces of apparatus. Northeast Teller County Fire Protection District would like an intergovernmental agreement outlining fees and schedules and such. Their proposed agreement has been reviewed by our legal counsel and is before you tonight. Basically setting up an option for us to seek outside support for maintenance of our fleet. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
I think it's a better scenario than have to do, rely on a dealer.
Correct.
Maybe take it to Colorado Springs or Denver or wherever,
Just let it sit there for a week or two.
Yeah.
They have been very timely in terms of getting us in and turning our equipment around. So our experience with Netco has been very positive in this regard.
Any other question? You hear a motion, please?
Yeah, I'll motion that we can approve the intergovernmental agreement with the Northeast Teller County Fire Protection District for emergency vehicle maintenance.
I'll second.
Vote please, Melissa.
Councilman Reed,
Yes.
Councilwoman Shmoneri,
Yes.
Councilman Sodamani,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Litherland,
Yes.
Mayor Ashworth.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief. Discussion regarding sharing of fiber computer network communication with full house resorts. Frank?
I'm not Frank tonight. I'm speaking on that. As you'll recall, we came before you on April 6th regarding the city's need to do something to address our communication network for the computers being cut off by the hotel project. Excuse me. And that evening, I believe Baxter indicated he was out of town, and Bronco Billy's didn't catch that was on the agenda. They were not present for that. We discussed that night, this was the recommendation from Phoenix Technology, our IT consultant. And at that time, staff had mentioned that we were thinking that Full House would be responsible for the $57,979.96 of the project based on the February 3rd, 2021 height variance, which on page 3 has a discussion about communication study, communication degrading and equipment having to be replaced because of the projects of that. But Full House is asked to come before council this evening and discuss the project and the cost. So I will turn it over to them.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I wasn't out of town on that meeting on the 6th, but we had employee meetings for some renovations that we've got going. And so I was in a meeting just down the road while you guys were having the council meeting that night. I did watch the entire thing on YouTube early the next morning. And I was familiar with the requirement and the resolution where the height variance was passed by you for our project, where we would be required to do a communications study about communications or signal interruptions with the police and fire radio. Now, I hadn't heard at that point about any problems with the internet signal. We were in that resolution bound to work with a company called Aviat Networks for the study. And Aviat maintains police and fire radios all over the country and certainly all over Colorado. And that study is ongoing. It's almost concluded. There was an email that Frank and Chief Bright were part of just this week, and we have a subsequent call with Aviat this Friday. All right, so let's go back to the internet. So watching the city council meeting from that night and learning about the almost $60,000, I started considering some of the challenges that we faced because, like the city, we own property around town where all of our buildings aren't contiguous. We own buildings that aren't adjacent to Bronco Billy's that we've had to address internet signal challenges with. And we did it for a lot less than $60,000. So through some communications with Paul and Frank, we set up a call. Paul set up a call with Phoenix, with Ward and Mike from his team, and we had our IT experts on the team, on the call, and we were talking about possible solutions that could resolve the signal interruption other than what we ended up going with. And on that call, it was discussed that there were solutions that didn't cost as much. And so thinking about what we're legally bound to do, we talked on that call, like I said on the call, that it was like taking the existing internet signal, call that a Pinto, and taking it to a Cadillac. And they're like, no, it's not really a Pinto to a Cadillac because we're not running fiber to every city building, but it's more like going from a Pinto to a new Dodge Ram, I think is what Mike said from Phoenix. And so just thinking about how this could have been resolved for less money, which is what we're bound to do, is resolve it. I felt like that us Full House Resorts being responsible entirely for going from a Pinto to a new Dodge Ram wasn't exactly fair. So we had a meeting with Frank and with Paul, and they were going to address that, I think, in a workshop with you guys maybe earlier today, and we were going to discuss it tonight about sharing the cost of that rather than Full House shouldering 100% of that cost. And I'll be happy to answer any questions about that.
Baxter, the way I see it, maybe I'm not seeing this as clear as I may, possible, but your project has knocked out our communication systems.
Right, I don't think it's knocked it out yet.
Okay.
But at some point, it will obstruct the internet antenna signal.
All right, we have already gone through twice or three times when your subcontractors have cut our communications line. I mean, we went, what, 4 days where we couldn't contact the police department, the fire department, city hall. You know, you can't operate a city that way.
Right. I wasn't familiar
You
with
know,
that.
I'm sure you know
Yeah.
this. But as far as I'm concerned, and I think there's a legal term for this, that, you know, if you're the cause of the problem, you make the one who suffer, make them whole. And again, in my opinion, you should pay for the entire project.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Anyone else?
I think there's a number of things we probably need to look at and
Well, and
discuss
again,
that involves this thing. I don't think it's as simple of an answer as what it looked like on the face value. I know I jumped on it and I shouldn't have. To make a decision, I think this is something we need to spend some time discussing.
and I have no problems
Yeah.
with, you know, having another discussion, but, you know, again, the way I see it, your project, which we appreciate, don't get me wrong, caused the problem.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that, Councilman. I really don't.
Okay.
And
We can have a discussion about that.
yeah, like I said, we were prepared for the radio and fire antenna because that's what had been talked about for a long time. And we've been working with Aviat just as we were directed to do to get that resolved. It's just the first time I heard about the internet was on the April 6th meeting. And so we started scrambling and, you know, had meetings. Like I said, with Phoenix, we had a call with Phoenix and the mayor to get us to this point. I think it's worth discussing. It's a lot of money.
What kind of timeline are we looking at before we lose communication as you're going up?
Well, as I understand it, the work started last Thursday on this solution that was approved in the April 6th meeting. So I think that the solution's already taken shape. So I think that the work's happening. Is that right?
And then,
Yeah.
and then how long moving forward with the fiber optic till we're,
We should be live with fiber within the month.
okay,
Yeah, I think the way it works right now, if you consider our elevator shafts that are down there, there's a gap between them as the internet antenna looks this direction. And it just so happens that that gap is where the signal's passing. But at some point, there'll be walls up that cover that gap around the elevator shafts. So now that won't be before the end of this month. So you shouldn't have any further interruptions as it relates to that signal being interrupted.
I guess, you know, the construction will go ahead, the city's got a contract, pay for this construction
Yes, sir.
contract. The question is, how do you pay for it, we pay for it, how we divide it?
Right. That's when I started scrambling the next morning after I watched the YouTube of the meeting.
Regardless of what we agree on or do, fiber optics will be put in.
Right. Well, if memory serves me correct, and that's a big if, but at the meeting, I think it was approved to be paid out of the contingency fund from the city, and then we would reimburse you. I believe that's what happened.
Is
But
that correct, Paul?
That's correct.
Aaron, do you have anything to add to this?
Well, I do agree with Councilman Mayor Pro Tem Litherland that the parties entered into a development agreement which contains a broad indemnification, making the developer liable to make the city whole in the event of any claims that arise. And so that, I think, is the legal basis for the developer to cover the cost, the entire cost. In addition, I think it's clear that if the parties at the city understood that the city's communication system was going to be jeopardized in any way by the height variance that was granted in 2021, that there certainly would have been a condition modification, would have
Right.
been worded differently. And so now to kind of hold the city to the tight language of the condition that was put in place really is, I think, and respectfully,
Yeah.
to Blanco Billy's, really is not in keeping with the relationship that the developer should have with the city. The project impacts are to be borne by the developer. The project impacts in any development are not to be the burden of the citizenry of the city of Cripple Creek. So really, it's inappropriate, I believe, from a legal standpoint, to have the citizens of Cripple Creek subsidize the project in this way. So I think from a legal basis, legal standpoint, the city is not responsible for this cost, and the project developer is responsible for this cost.
Thank you, Aaron. And listen, I want to be clear. Our intent is to make the city whole. That is our intent. It's just that as we discussed in our call, there was other ways to do it. And it was one of Phoenix's employees that actually said, well, yeah, it could have been resolved for $10,000. There is a way to keep the city whole that costs less than the method that we're doing. That's all we're saying.
And I certainly.
Right, so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Respectfully, I understand that. It's really, I think, the city's job to do its diligence and determine for itself the best way to resolve this. And I think that we've heard from our city staff that they've done that. So again, I think I certainly appreciate the gracious understanding of the problem on the part of Bronco Billy's, but it really is the city's job to determine the scope of the problem and to assess the solution, and then to implement the solution that the city staff has, brought to you as a recommendation.
Thank you, Aaron.
One more thing, if you refer to resolution number 2021-4, if you need a copy, I'm sure we can provide it, page 3. Pretty much states the city's position.
Okay, I don't have it in front of me.
Copy of that, I'm sure we can provide it.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
Aaron, do we take action on this with a motion? Or do we move forward with the resolution?
Well, I
How
think,
does it
I
work
think
for
you
you?
could certainly, yes.
I guess I would propose to bring this to a vote the first meeting in May. And, we try to have more discussions. I think it's clear where the city stands. But being fair, we will talk about it more.
Was that the first meeting in June, Mayor?
May.
This is the first meeting.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, thank you. And listen, we're available to talk about it at any time. I don't pretend to be an IT expert or
Well, I think it's beyond that point now.
right.
I think it's to the point of, the city's legal stand is that we have liable for the whole thing. But we want to hear your side of it.
I appreciate that.
Then it will come to a vote,
Okay,
first meeting in June.
got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Baxter.
Thank you, Baxter.
With no other business, meeting adjourned.